Right, good morning. Good morning, everyone. If you can all settle down. Let's start again. Good morning and welcome to CHSB90. A coming together of old boys, teachers, or perhaps I should call them masters, and partners. As Ronnie Scott used to say when confronted by a very full jazz club, you should have been here last Saturday. Anyone should have been here. We were paying the bouncers to throw them in. But of course, we had to come today, unlike in our school days. There's one important apology to make. The Old Cicestrians president, Jeff Wills. He had hoped to be here, but recent hip surgery made his journey from Jersey risky, and wisely, he had to send his apologies. But you can read his foreword in the commemorative booklet. And one particular welcome to Yasmin Maskatira, the executive principal of the current school. And in fact, I'd like to say how helpful the school has been in helping us organise this event and make available all the rooms that we're going to see and the rooms that we are using. I hope everyone has an enjoyable day. And if you don't, I'll invoke the spirits of masters and prefects past and put you in detention. But I must first of all point out the fire exits and go through that procedure. We have fire exits on either side and behind us. In the event of a fire, please leave and assemble in the car park and wait and don't go until everyone has been accounted for. Now, I won't go through the programme for today, for which you have a copy, but before I introduce David Wood and we start the presentations, we have a message from an old boy.
Hi, I'm Tim Peake, European Space Agency astronaut and former pupil at Chichester High School. I'd like to welcome you to today's celebrations of 90 years since the foundation of Chichester High School for Boys in 1918. I have so many great memories of my time as a student. I love studying science, but perhaps the strongest influence on my future career was being a member of the school's combined cadet force. The skills we learn outside the classroom are just as important as the knowledge we gain inside. And I'm extremely grateful to the school for giving me the opportunity to succeed in my chosen career. I wish you all a great day and enjoy meeting up with other old Cicestrians.
We were very pleased to have Tim Peake produce that little video for us. And now, before we move on now into the first of the presentations, and I'd like to introduce David Wood. David, would you like to come and join us on the other lectern? David Wood, OBE, who went to school here in 1955 to 62, went on to Oxford before becoming an actor, theatre director, playwright, children's author, and a magician. He's known as the National Children's Dramatist, and his 75-plus plays are performed worldwide. He won an Olivier Award for his adaptation of Goodnight, Mr. Tom, and his recent production of The Go-Between, and currently The Tiger Who Came to Tea. As an actor, he played on stage opposite great alumni, like great people like Sir Michael Redgrave and Shelley Winters. And of course, many will remember his film role with Malcolm McDowell in If. And of course, he cut his teeth in drama productions while at Chi High. Ladies and gentlemen, David Wood.
Thank you very much. I'm very flattered to be asked to do this presentation, which Bill Allen has put together, along with Alan Green, who I found out recently I was his former prefect. There you go. No, it's a great pleasure to be here and to celebrate 90 years. I think Tim Peake said 1918 then. And wrong. He was 10 years out. But this is to celebrate 90 years of secondary education of boys in Chichester. And I came a bit late. I came into the second year of the second term of the second year, which was a little bit odd. but I did stay through until 1963. So some of my memories will tune in, I think, to some of your memories. Of course, I was wandering around just now out there, and here we all are. None of us have changed at all. The years have gone by, a little bit less hair perhaps. But let's go. We go back to 1928, and this was the Jazz Age, a period of hedonism and wealth and freedom and youthful exuberance. But we mustn't forget that 1928 was only 10 years after World War I, and the Wall Street crash happened a year later, and of course there was a worldwide depression. And during that time, Noel Coward had a hit musical with a song called World Weary. So it's quite an interesting time to create a new school in Chichester. Worthing High School for boys and Chichester High School for girls were already in existence, and the Educational Committee approved plans for a new school for boys. The county architect was asked to plan a brick building, and the site was chosen. This was Kingsham Farm, south of the railway, and a 9-acre site. And the design was to be quite modern, single-storied, which was unlike the traditional nature of the girls' school, which had 2 stories. And we were to have courtyards and quadrangles and corridors, and a central combined assembly hall and gym, and a craft room, which there it is on the right, which is still there. I've walked past it this morning. This whole complex, which is still sort of recognisable to most of us there, the cost was £24,000. And the school opened as the Chichester Secondary School for Boys. It changed the name soon after to Chichester High School for Boys. And it was in September 1928. And if you were paying fees, which most people had to, it was 5 guineas a term. £5, 5 shillings a term in old money, and there were some scholarships for poorer students. Now here is the original plan. Down at the bottom there, you can see that area where you came in, and but there's quite a lot that is different actually. I can't see the old gym, the dreaded gym in my case. I can't see that there, but that was the shape of it, and we'll see that it did change a little bit later on. Now, further images and plans are on display in the boards in the other room there, as you've probably seen. Also, the various acts and the political decisions that governed the development of education in England. The newly constituted Board of Governors interviewed candidates for headmaster, and Herbert Collins, M.A., was appointed, and he had just five assistant masters. There was a splendid opening day, which didn't actually happen until 5 months later in February, and the opening was done by Lord Percy. You can see the plaque there, which again I think Alan Green has cunningly rescued and is in the other room. And Lord Percy himself was the president of the Board of Education, and he did the ceremony, but he brought his wife with him, and she got presented by. Now, is she the most tall woman in the world? Or is that boy a midget? I mean, it is extraordinary, isn't it? Or is the boy on a box or something? But she's incredibly tall. You'll notice too that the boy's wearing a grey jacket, which was the uniform, at the time, at the beginning. And Herbert Collins put together the first tranche of teachers. They were all recruited from either Oxbridge or from London University. And they were known, and now I need to ask Alan, I've got here the Aboriginals or Aborigines. What were they actually called, Alan?
Aboriginals.
Aboriginals. Yeah. Was that because they were the original teachers, maybe? I don't think they were Aboriginals. And you'll see here that you've got Herbert Collins, the headmaster, on the left, and Monk Watson, who stayed for a long, long time. Kenneth Quick, who we hear about a bit more. And there's Fishy Scales. That is amazing. He was there right from the very start. Fishy Scales in 1928. And both Monk Watson and Fishy Scales served the school into the 1950s. There's a cartoon which Bill has found from Punch in 1929. And the boy is saying, "Please, teacher, what did I learn today?" And the teacher is saying, "Well, that's a peculiar question." And the boy replies, "Well, they'll ask me when I get home." And it's quite interesting, the interaction between the staff and the boys, and of course the curriculum of subjects taught, which I suppose the parents might have asked about. Well, the syllabus embraced all the subjects that we know today. There was science, there were arts, languages and mathematics, and the teachers specialised in specific subjects, albeit often combining roles. Herbert Collins apparently took French, not only took French, but in French. You had to speak French the whole time, and woe betide a boy who failed his exams, apparently. And from the start, academic standards were high, but the number of the first entrants in September 1928, and this was a surprise to me, was 63. There were only 63 boys. 18 were free, and this money came from the local educational authority. It was awarded on an exam basis, so it was selective. But the remaining 45 paid their 5 guineas. And they were aged from 9 to 14 and over. But in other words, it hadn't got into a situation where there was a sixth form. And this system stayed in place until 1944, and the Butler Education Act, which changed everything. Now, 4 houses were created, rather mimicking public school practice. They were all named after bishops of Chichester. There was St Richard's, and St Wilfrid's, Story House and Sherborne House. Now, some slides here which are of some early staff members, not right from the very beginning, but 1935 and 1938. And you can see a few, again, people who a lot of us will remember. There's Perce, Pelham, Dutch Holland, there's Horsey Stables, Monk Watson's over there, you've got Mobby O'Brien, you've got Giddy Gahan there, Gaffer Reeves, there's Fishy and Kenneth Quick. I don't know whether he had a nickname. That's Mr. Bishop, I think, the headmaster. And you come down to a little bit later on, and you've got Geoffrey Marwood, and a lot of these are the same, but I think that's Eric Smedley there, who he taught me French at one point. And Mr. Pasquill there, chemistry master, and oh yes, Mobby. Look, a very young-looking Mobby. I don't know how well you can see that, but it's interesting. They imparted their wisdom to successive generations of boys, and we do a little close-up here. Oh look, there's another one. Yes, I think all of them are the same ones that we saw in that first slide. But we zoom in now and look at Dutch Holland there. You see, I mean, I remember him as looking a bit older than that. and horsey stables as well. Yes, well, Dutch was very famous for his humorless attitude to anybody caught whistling. Now, sadly, he developed, again, I didn't know this, I mean, I was in his form, but he developed TB, and that ruined his considerable sporting abilities, apparently. He was very sporty. But he took geography, of course. In 1930, Gordon Horsey Stables arrived, and he taught physics. And Giddy Gahan arrived, Sidney Gahan, at the same time. So 1930, so they really were early on, and he was classics, of course. And by 1930 to 31, there were 254 boys, so it had grown quite a bit. And the first entrants to Oxford School Certificate had taken their exams. They'd all passed in English, history, Latin, French, mathematics, chemistry and geography. But by 31-32, the number of classes exceeded the accommodation, and so the first extensions became necessary. And by then as well, sixth forms in arts and science were established. New staff joined. There was Martin O'Brien, Mobby, who we saw earlier, for maths, and Charles Pelham, Peirce, for English. So there was a core staff which, incredibly really, served the school for 30 years. Peirce Pelham had the wooden leg that made his humour less than wonderful. He had a priceless phrase that if you were late with homework, you'd say, "There may be a reason, boy, but no excuse." And I remember him saying to me, I was in detention, the whole form were in detention, and I was meant to be having a rehearsal for the school play. And Geoffrey Marwood managed to get me out of the detention because of the school play. And Peirce, as I left, said, "It is a great shame that offences against discipline are considered less important than participation in the school play." He did let me go. The first Martlet magazine was published under the editorship of Kenneth Quick, and this chronicled each year of activities and achievements. And there were lots of school societies from the beginning, and sports teams, drama and music. Chess was the very first society formed, and in fact they were doing plays quite early on too. And also there were trips abroad, Mr. Collins particularly, apparently extolling the virtues of Paris to the boys. And there's a slide here from 1934, which is a sporty one. Soccer, cricket and athletics developed, and this is quite interesting because Mobby O'Brien, again, they were older when I was at school, but he apparently was very much into soccer, and Giddy Gahan cricket, and they led these games for years, and there were inter-school competitions against schools in Portsmouth and Horsham and Worthing, continuing through to the end of when the grammar schools were in the area. And we'll look at some of the other activities a bit later. The introduction came quite quickly of a school uniform, and there we go, there's the classic cap which most of us hated wearing and used to slip over, particularly in the late 50s, when a nice little quiff or something was needed, and they used to creep further and further back on the head, I remember. And the tie. The bright emerald green colour, whether it was on purpose, but it was very distinctive. It contrasted with the other two schools. The Chichester High School for Girls was a sort of moss green, and Worthing had a bottle green. And next, now this is a wonderful picture coming up of Bill Allen, who so nicely introduced this morning, and this is him on his first day. And he's got the grey shirt as well as the short trousers, and I didn't remember this, but they were worn irrespective of the season for the first 2 years, so you've got very cold knees in the winter. There's a panoramic school photo coming up. This was from 1930, and there were 254 boys, as I think we said there. There's Fishy Scales. There's Monk Watson there. Now, who would that be?
Kenneth Quick.
Is that Kenneth Quick?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it probably is, yes. I don't know whether we recognise. There's Dutch Holland, surely. Yeah, so he was there. I don't know who that is. If anybody knows, do shout out and tell us. But you can see there were not that many masters at that time. There's a slightly less formal photo from 1939, and that's Kenneth Quick in the middle there. And it is, of course, it's a sobering thought that this was just before the Second World War broke out, and maybe some of these young men were involved. And indeed, we know that Kenneth Quick, he died in action in the war. Now, in the summer of 1934, so going back a few years, Herbert Collins, the headmaster, left to become a school inspector. In 1954, he memorably returned to a speech day. And Kenneth Quick, in the summer term Marklet, he was still editing that, gave a glowing tribute to Collins. He said, "Personality and unbounded energy, he transformed an empty building into a school of whose record any headmaster would be proud." Now, his successor was Edgar Bishop, M.A. J.P. Sorry, go back again. So he actually had been an unsuccessful candidate for the head's job the first time round in 1928, but obviously 6 years later they thought he was perfect for the job. But he laid down various principles early on that the purpose of the school was to prepare boys for university, and the masters were not to discuss politics. Boys and masters should set the tone of the school, both in dress and punctuality. And apparently, well, he was obviously suffering from a certain paranoia, because he required one of the teachers, Mr. Liddell, to sign a declaration not to engage in political activity. I can't really think that trade unions were particularly active in the high school. I don't know, maybe they were. But also Bishop recruited 3 new masters. There was Pasquill, who we mentioned earlier on, Reeves, Gaffer Reeves came in then, and Geoffrey Marwood. And they enhanced sport, Pasquill particularly with cricket, and drama. Geoffrey, or Claude as we used to call him, Marwood, he really developed the whole thing of the school play over the next years, and he was a leading light in the Chichester Players, and he also later on became a board member of the Festival Theatre before it was built, and then subsequently right the way through. Now, am I right in thinking, Alan will know this, was Claude, you know, a lot of the nicknames were fairly obvious, but Claude, was it that he was named after the school skeleton?
Yes.
We're not apparently there was a school skeleton, I guess, right? But the skeleton was called Claude, and so Claude became Claude as well. Now, various additions to the school came about in 1937. We sort of had the familiar outline of the school that continued until the disbandment of the grammar system. These plans are now in the West Sussex Record Office, and there are further photos in the boards in the other room there. Now, the following slides, they illustrate the familiar view that we have of the buildings as they were then now, and of course they've survived to this day, even though they're not used. First of all, you've got the front. That's the door. We were never allowed in that door. I remember that impressive front door. I don't know whether parents were allowed in there for meetings with the headmaster, probably, but we were never allowed anywhere near there. There you are from the other side. And there's another one. Oh, this is the gym, of course. Oh dear, why did you have to put all these in, Bill? I hated the gym. We're now moving. Oh, there's the front door you weren't allowed in. And yeah, we're moving towards 1939, the outbreak of World War II, and the annual roll of the school had sort of built a bit. It was 360, and in the 10 years since opening, 752 boys had been admitted, 309 had gained a school certificate, 40 a higher, and 25 had gone off to university. And Kenneth Quick, in his editorial in the Martlet, he left just before the war started and wrote in the magazine, "I've seen the number of boys grow from 67 to 360 with a corresponding growth in intellectual, social and athletic life, coupled with an atmosphere of happiness, understanding and courtesy, which some call tone, through a cooperation of headmaster, masters and the boys." Well, parallel with this was the development of another school, the Lancastrian School, which had been there much, much earlier. That was founded in Georgian times in 1811 in Tower Street. And in 1910, they went to new purpose-built buildings in Orchard Street, now the Central School, it says. And in 1931, the Lancastrian became the Lancastrian Council Senior Boys' School. And with the post-war acts, it became a secondary modern school, and that relocated to new buildings on the Kingsham site, up this end of the site where we are now, over on the left there, and that was the building that formed the core of the 1971 to 2016 Chichester High School for Boys. As we will see later on today, there was a merger eventually with the high school following the decisions on comprehensive education. So when we go into World War II, difficult times obviously for everyone, but Chi High was not an exception. The air raid shelters were built, and post-war they became the armoury for the CCF and stores of Lee Enfield rifles. I'm afraid I never ventured in there, although I may have done for a smoke. I don't think quite a lot of people use the for smoking. But during the war, Monk Watson became an air raid spotter, looking out for incoming Nazi planes. But the school escaped bomb damage, while nearby towns, particularly Portsmouth and London, and the cathedral city of Coventry, suffered considerably. The teaching staff had lost some to the services, and this was somewhat compensated, apparently, by the arrival in 1943 of Mr. Bishop, the headmaster's daughter, to teach biology. And she apparently captured many hearts, both in the staff and amongst the boys as well. But sadly, the researchers of this presentation have failed to find a photograph of her. Oh dear, oh dear. But children from London were dispersed to country districts to escape the Blitz. And a whole school, the Henry Thornton School in Clapham, was billeted in Chichester and to the school. And this put further strain on teaching and classrooms. The school stayed until the summer of 1943. And in 2009, some of the evacuee boys returned for a reunion. There they are. And one of those evacuee pupils who became famous in later years was the footballer Jimmy Hill. He was Fulham FC, and he had a beard, and He was a TV pundit, of course, and very influential in breaking the maximum wage for footballers to allow them to get what they do today. He was immortalised as a statue, as we see. So, war came at a cost, and amongst the fallen, recognised on the memorial plaque, were many boys from the school, 59. And as we mentioned earlier, one of the Aboriginals teachers, Kenneth Quick, he died as a pilot officer in the RAF. Now, our past chairman, Colin Snook, has researched the individuals. You can see his work on one of the displays today. But the end of the war saw a return to normality. Teachers demobbed and returned, new staff recruited. One such arrived during the war. That was Miss Gertrude Lewis. Petite, serious and stern. She was known as Gert. And she'd been at the school pre-war, I never knew this, as the school secretary. She taught English initially to replace Perce Pelham during his sick leave, but stayed on when he returned and was a form mistress of 1A in the 50s. Then the...
1D.
1D? Well,
1D. How would you want
straight away. That's a detention, Bill Allen. Thank you. No, do correct any of this. There's a lot. News to me. The 40s saw the arrival of Messrs. Wake, William Wake, Wider, Titch Morris, Spiv, Civitar, Bogey Murch, Frankie Hale, Stevens. Now, I don't remember Stevens. What was his nickname? Tor.
yeah.
Thank you. Berth Bassett, Cliff Ward. Was he called Buzz, I think, too, as well? Cliff Ward and Mr. Poick as well. So they all arrived after the war, strengthening the teaching capacity and adding personality and skill. And within a short time, the 11 plus and the grammar school stroke secondary modern system was in place. And it's true to say, I think, that Rab Butler's 1944 Education Act was an enormous achievement, creating an entire education system, particularly as this was all happening and being formulated in the depths of a horrific world war. The hope had been that private education would be integrated into a state system, but sadly the Act did nothing on this front, and while a decent education might be assured, it probably failed to tackle the twin problems of religious and class divisions in society. But it did mean free education for the majority of us, and so Chi-Hi became a state grammar school. Now, when the government changed to the Labour government and Attlee came in, a wide-ranging and radical agenda was attempted. Nationalisation, of course, the National Health Service, the welfare state, and crucially for us, the implementation of the 1944 Act, which is, that's always interested me, the fact that it was a sort of conservative idea, which was then implemented by the Labour government. And many had hoped that elitism would end and a common education system would be achieved, but private and direct grant schools were not touched. And so you had Christ Hospital, for instance, or the big public schools still going strong. We're going to change gear very slightly here just to talk a little bit about some of the teachers. We've seen that by the eve of the Second World War, successive headmasters and the boards of governors had appointed a corps of teachers with charisma, personality and academic ability, and some served the school for 30 years. The 1965 marklet celebrated the retirement of two such stalwarts. Arthur Scales, Fishy Scales on the right, taught history. he was latterly deputy head, and Michael O'Brien, Mobby on the left, ended as head of maths, but also was a lead on physics and sport as well, and RE as a Catholic, where Giddy Gahan also had a role. And both of them, and I didn't realise this, played cricket at the highest club level, Fishy Scale, Chichester, and Mobby O'Brien for Bognor. Now, we've got a couple of slides here from 1949, the staff, see, it's quite interesting. 49, it really feels quite early, but that's Cliff Ward, I think. Not sure who that is.
Smith, Adrian Smith.
Adrian Smith, thank you. Who's that?
Elliot.
Elliot. There's Spiv. Frankie Hale. Who's that?
Oscar Lloyd.
Oscar Lloyd. Oscar Lloyd. Now, I don't remember him, but apparently he was rather special.
First World War.
Who's that one?
Tall Stevens. Tall.
Right. And is that Collins? Yeah. Now, this is a mystery one to me. Who's that? Mr. Thomas.
Thomas, yeah.
Mr. Thomas Mads. Well, he comes up a little bit later on, and I keep on wondering who he was. So obviously there's Peirce and there's Gaffer Reeves and there's that's Pasquill, Titch, and Giddy Gahan, Fishy, and this must be is that Monk Watson? Is that Mobby? Yeah. Horsey Stables. There's Marwood. There's Gert, and who's that?
Killer Colgan. Taylor.
Is that Taylor?
Killer Colgan.
Oh, Killer Colgan. Yeah, that's a new one to me. PE. Oh, well, I wouldn't have liked him at all. 53, we've moved on a little bit, but presumably, you see, now we've got Bishop, and there's Fishy, Scales, Mobby, Marwood, Pasquill, Gert, Gaffer. Who's that?
Monk Watson.
Oh, that's Monk Watson still.
Yeah.
He's still there. There's Stables. Dutch, look, he's smiling. I've never seen that before. There's Peirce. And Spiv's there. That's Cliff Ward. He was a nice man. He never taught me, but his wife, Mab, M-A-B, Mab was an amateur actress, and she played my mother in the Bognor Regis Amateur Theatrical Society production of something. And there's Titch there, must be. So, and is this Mr. Thomas? Oh, thank you. I know now. It's been worrying me. There's Bonzo Hulbert. George A.V. TD Cox. There's Collins. George Ayling, yes. Frankie Hale there. Is that Stevens again? Yeah. I don't know who that is.
English.
English. That's Bert Bassett, isn't it? Yeah. And no, there we are. Very good. So that was 1953. We'll give a special little mention now to Spiv. And even then, his gown was tattered. Do you remember? Had this filthy, sort of moth-eaten, mouldy gown, which he was obviously very proud to wear as a sort of rebellious thing.
In the end of it.
And he, I remember particularly because I used to help in the library sometimes, and he said to me one day, I was in the sixth form, he said, "What are you going to do when you leave this dump?" And I said, "Well, you know what I want to do. I want to go into the theatre." And he, and I'd never forgot it. He said, "Well, don't just be an actor." He said, "That would be stupid. Don't just be an actor." He said, "Why don't you, write something or direct something or produce something?" He said, "Don't just do that." And I never forgot that. And I mean, right. And so years later, when he was the secretary of the Friends of the Chichester Festival Theatre, and I came back with a production of mine for children, and met him for the first time after some years, I reminded him of that, and of course he didn't. And I don't know what the story always was, that he couldn't really smile because of the treatment he'd had in a Japanese prisoner of war camp. I don't know whether that's true or not. But he did mean a lot to me, particularly because of his interest in the theatre. Now, that brings us on to a picture that Bill has found, or Alan has found, of a school play lineup, and I haven't a clue which play it was. Oh, the Bourgeois Gentilhomme. Merci, monsieur. Oh, right. And so that must have been in about 52, 53, 54, something like that.
About 52.
52. Oh, thank you. Well, that solved a mystery. We were sitting there the other day, Bill and I, saying, I wonder what that was. He said, it's the Three Musketeers. I said, it's not. I was in that. And you look at the ones in the front, and they don't look like anything from Musketeer land. Some teachers were loved, some feared, but they constituted a formidable team of successive headmasters. Eccentricity appeared occasionally. Bonzo Hulbert, with his bubble car, I remember the bubble car, which didn't have reverse. And so every day boys would be grabbed in order to push the car away so that he could drive home. And I'm told that Oscar Lloyd, who'd been a survivor of the First World War, was quite remarkable and had lots of anecdotes and used to doze off to sleep in lessons quite often. Then, of course, there was the amazing Bogey Murch. There he is. He was selected to teach biology, and I didn't know this, without a qualification in the subject. But he became a legend, great teacher up to O-level, with his enthusiasm, delving under tree trunks in Kingley Vale on bug club trips on a Saturday morning, and very inventive too with time-lapse photography, tree buds, things like that. I don't know who that person is, but that maybe was somebody to do with the place where they were visiting. I thought at one point it was T.D. Cox, but it's not.
Was it Hazelmere Museum?
Oh, Hazelmere Museum. Well,
Because
maybe,
he had links
yes,
with John
that is a
Clegg.
little church-like. Yeah. That is Tor Stevens, who I never really knew and never taught me, but apparently he was highly skilled at zoology and botany at the sixth form level. And there was Cliff Ward, we've mentioned, who was a very good physics teacher who was sadly lost to the new Bognor Grammar School in the late 50s. Then for science you had Marwood, Claude and Pascoe for chemistry. And then you had Giddy Gahan for classics and Scales for history. Smedley, Wake and Reeves and Hale, all languages. Pelham, Civitar, Lewis doing English, and of course many more. Not forgetting the gym, well, I'd like to forget it, but I won't. Sport and athletics. There was Baldy Ashton. I always remembered him because he didn't have a gown. There was always that thing. But I don't think Maurice Hall had a gown either. He's somewhere in the room today. But Tinker Taylor, who was my particular hate, and Rod Seeley as well, of course, who was rather nice. I liked him. All the cricket teams benefited from the enthusiasm and ability of Frank Hale. He was a French master. He was also the last amateur soccer player to appear in the old First Division, now the Premier League. Then, of course, for humour, who better than Titch Morris? An early picture of Titch Morris. And his description in the Marklet of the cricket match between St Richard's, of whom I think he was the housemaster of St Richard's, and Andrew's house, includes the reference to one Keith Upton, who had in a previous rugby match maimed 3 Richards Juniors for life and partially disabled 5. He was, Titch inferred, from the ancient stock of Garth, Elmo the Mighty and Thomas the Terrible Tapeworm Strangler. However, apparently St Richard's went on to win a nail-biting match, and Titch was looking forward to the winter, complaining about this year's flaming June, when only exams prevented life from coming to a complete standstill. Now we've got a nice smiley quartet coming up. You've got Frank Hale on the right, Wide Awake, on the bottom right, and Eric Smedley, bottom left. But who is top left?
Killer.
Sorry?
Killer Colgan.
That's Killer Colgan again. That's right. Well, there we are. That's filled in another gap. Thank you. Well, a new generation arrived in the late 50s. Morris, or Henry Hall, who is, I'm delighted to say, here today. Tom Beastle, I think Johnny Godwin came round about that time, and John Hyland, bless him, who was a lovely man. But we get ahead of ourselves. We've got to return. Those are the teachers. We've got to return to the immediate post-war years. Now, school discipline became a problem towards the end of Bishop's reign as headmaster. He retired in April 1953, not ending his time at the end of the school year. The Marklet gave a glowing tribute, praising his judgment and skill in surmounting the evolution from a school in 1934 with 18 masters and 360 boys to one in 52 with 38 staff and over 700 pupils. He set the ideals of hard work, punctual performance, duty and pursuit of the highest standards of performance. And on retirement, he took holy orders. He became a local vicar. And in the period before K.D. Anderson arrived, apparently riotous behaviour occurred in the upper school, which Scales and Watson had failed to control. This was all news to me. So the new headmaster had a challenge when he arrived, and he approached it in a military and efficient and punctilious, still there before me, punctilious manner. So, Kenneth Drummond Anderson. Ta-da! He was appointed in 1953, and after an interregnum with Scales as the acting headmaster, Anderson took charge. He was tall, he had a military manner, he was very fond of the word punctilious in assemblies, and he insisted on a public school attitude and culture in the school. He stamped his authority very quickly, and among his early initiatives were aiming for academic excellence, the introduction of Year 4 remove, 4R, the brightest set took O-levels early in English language, French and maths. Then there was a reduction in the number of prefects from 33 to 21 apparently, and they were given clear roles and duties. There was the creation of the CCF, the Combined Cadet Force, and Captain Lawton, teacher Lawton, was in charge, and an RAF section followed later. There was the creation of a Parents' Association for the first time, and the revision of the house system on a geographic basis. It increased from 4 that we mentioned earlier to 8 with the addition of Bell House. There's Bishop Bell, they were all named after bishops. And I was in Bell House, and Dizzy Dyer, do you remember Dizzy Dyer? He was a nice maths master, he was the main master in charge. Lake House, King House, and Andrews House. During, well, I suppose right from the start of the Anderson regime, discipline was strictly enforced, and visits to the headmaster's study on a serious misdemeanour, or in my friend Patrick Hastings' case, he was telling me this morning, not a serious misdemeanour, they often ended up with a caning. Or, of course, that rather barbaric institution of which I was part, prefect's court, which, looking back, I mean, one can't imagine that being used today. But the caning was administered by KD himself in succession to Monk Watson, who had obviously apparently done it before. KD's wife joined the staff, and there she is. And I was surprised years later, but I was flattered, but I was asked to do the eulogy at her funeral. I wrote a thing, and I started off by talking about her. We called her Kate. She was Mrs. Anderson, the headmaster's wife. He was the headmaster. Their nicknames, unlike some of those of the other teachers, implied little disrespect. KD reflected the upright, somewhat formal, yet approachable top man we knew, and Kate suggested the kindly, caring, clever, calm, yet no-nonsense person by whom some of us were lucky enough to be taught. I was jolly nice, but of course it was at a funeral, you know, I couldn't. And I don't think KD was that approachable to some people. But they were a formidable couple. Pat and I always remember one of those sort of quadrangles near the staff room, and Kate advancing along, and her slip gradually falling to her ankles, and not changing. She showed no hint of alarm at all. He sort of picked it up and walked in. I don't know why I remember that, but if we go on now to 53, 1953, the teaching staff, apparently there was a certain schism that developed between the younger masters who had war or national service experience, but the others who went back much further than that and were a bit staid, the pre-war older masters. And retirement gradually occurred, new staff were appointed. Does that give a year there? I'm not sure. 53. Yeah, 53. So younger ones came in, like Morris Hall and John Hyland and Johnny Godwin and Tom Beastle, who we mentioned. And also James Muckle. Is he here today? Yes, he is here today. Welcome, welcome indeed. Mr. Muckle was so young when he came, because I remember this, we thought he was a new boy. We really did. We couldn't understand why he wasn't dressed quite right. He turned out to be a new master, teaching Russian, I think so? Yeah, indeed. And we've got another picture here which has had a lot of names of the boys filled in too, which I won't go through too many. You can see the staff there. I don't think we've mentioned, I don't think we've mentioned Bot Riley yet. He was a nice man. I was in his
physics, yeah.
class. There's Giddy Gahan, Mobby, KD, Scales. You see, they're all still here. I can't quite see who that is.
It's me. It's me.
Ah, it is. There he is. There he is. Wonderful. Sitting next to Mr. Marwood. And there's Perce. How did he get up there? That must have been really difficult for him, mustn't it? There's Baldy. There's Spiff. And now who's that? That's. I think that was was it a German assistant? Oh look, there's Miss Pestle from the kitchen. Well, well, well. So, isn't it interesting? Right. Right. In general, the school achieved an excellent academic record, although the premises did leave something to be desired. The huts were an example of this. Very hot in summer and freezing in winter, despite those coke stoves. You remember the coke stoves? Where I'm sure that if you were in there for a lesson, you'd come out high as a kite from the fumes. But the school, I think that a lot of us remember, looked very much like this by that time. And so you had the gym up there, and you had those classrooms, and there was that quadrangle which you were never allowed to set foot on. And there's the dining hall and the art room, and we used to change for the school play behind there and put on the school play there. And then there was the addition here was the extra level that was built for the library. The Crush Hall staff room there, KD's office was there, and the grass you were never allowed on. And this quadrangle here with grass on, I always remember that. This is a terrible story, really. But Pat Hastings and I were standing about here. I don't know why we were standing there, but we were. And Perce Pelham, because of his wooden leg, was the only person that was allowed to step on the grass because it was a shortcut to the staff room here. And there was one particular day, and he came hobbling, bless him, down this way, and then cut across as he normally did. And as he got to about there, it was quite extraordinary, but the most immense shower of rain fell. And of course this was open, and he got absolutely soaked as he went across to here, and he came across and got to the, and the shower stopped. Just when he got to this. It was like magic. And I feel very guilty that we did find it terribly funny. We're going on to talk a little bit about sport and games now. I'm not the best person to talk about this, really. I managed to get through my entire school career only playing rugger once. And that was because I got the wrong day. Normally I used to hide. And I also, I did have a doctor's note which I managed to get towards the end, which I found the other day, and is wafer thin and very well used. But if it was a football day, then some of us used to be muckabouts and sort of, you know, we didn't play anything, but we used to have a chat. And try and sneak a fag if we could. And but on this day, it was a rugger day, and I got it wrong. And Frankie Hale said that I, you know, had to play and everything. And I'd never learnt the rules because I arrived late at the school. Never played rugger before, so I played, but I managed to never touch the ball or anything like that. No. So here I am talking authoritatively, all about sport and games. Sorry about that. There is a view of the school from almost where we are here, where we're sitting here, I think, looking back down the other way when there were all the playing fields there. And these are pre-war, and I can't really authoritatively tell you anything about them at all, except that one is obviously football and one is obviously cricket. And there's another picture here from 1934, which looks like cricket too. And in 45 and 46, or maybe, here we've got a team, and there's Mobby, who it seems was very much in charge of soccer, of football, and this must be Mr. Bishop. So that was, we think, 1945 or 6. And oh yes, look, 45 to 6. Yes, so it's both years. Yes. Right, and the next one is, now this is interesting to me, because look who's here, Gilly Gahan, and apparently he was the rugger coach. And I never knew that. I mean, this rather supercilious man who taught us Latin never looked like a sportsman. But you see, that's the thing of years going by, isn't it? He obviously wasn't involved in sport when we were there. There's another one, and there he is again. Look, he's smiling there. He's laughing his head off there. Again, I'm afraid I'm not sure what date that was. But the rugby team was called the Grasshoppers, and they started in 1944. Then we've got a nice picture here of Rod Seeley, and I do remember him with affection. I lived in Felpham at the time, and he was staying in Felpham, and he used to be on the bus in the morning. And after a period of getting to know him for about 2 years, I suppose, we used to have a chat. But no, he actually did help people who, like me, were useless in the gym. And I actually did a sort of handstand once, thanks to him. O'Brien and Hale, they led on the cricket and soccer. And during the war and the post-war years, a succession of good teams competed against all the nearby grammar schools, from Brighton to Portsmouth and stations in between. And the rugby goes on here with, now this was when I was at the school. There's KD and Rod there, and we can recognise quite a few people there, I think. Is that John Civita? Yes. Yeah, Spiv's son. And there's Tom Jeffers. And where's Alan Paulson? He must be there. Yeah. And Rumpus is there. Is that Gary Allen? Yeah. And no, well, that was obviously a rather successful team, because I remember Alan Paulson was the captain, and they did very well. Chris Salter is there too somewhere, isn't he? Oh, yes, there he is. Next to KD. Who?
Jon Snow.
Jon Snow. Is he in this picture?
Left at the back.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, there's Jon Snow. Gracious me, we only think of him as a cricketer. Let's look at football now. I think that was the Colts team. And then there was a first team in 1960 and 61. So we probably see some of the same faces here. There's John Smith up there. And who's that? Who's that? Is that our
Liam.
introductory genius, Mr. Bill Allen? It is.
Brian Cudmore.
There's Johnny Richards. Now, who's that? No, that's Ken Hode. Yeah, is that Cudmore? Brian Cudmore. Well, he was very physically adept. And who's that? Morrill, Dave Morrill. Yes, he lived quite near me. So that was soccer in 1960-61, and we can go back even further apparently to cricket. We're starting cricket a bit earlier, and Jeff Wills sadly can't be with us today, but there he is, oh yes, Frankie Hale is there again. He's always there. He's always there. So that was not quite sure which year actually, but there we are. Now, where do we go? This is cricket. Now, Jon Snow should be in this picture. Can anybody see Jon Snow? There he is. There's Jon Snow, and he had come from, was it Christ Hospital or somewhere? He came just in the sixth form, I seem to remember. But there are various people who... There's Trevor Hamilton, who a lot of you will remember. So that was 1961. Doug Murgatroyd, is he in there?
Yeah.
Top 13.
39. There.
There he is. Yeah. And
Point out the photographer.
where's Bill? Bill, you're in this too.
I wasn't in that one.
Oh, he wasn't in that one.
Wasn't good.
You can't be in them all. If we
The caretaker.
go on to...
Yeah.
what about this one, Bill? Are you in this one?
Yeah, I'm in that one.
Ah,
And Keith on it.
right. So who have we got? There's Trevor Hamilton, yeah?
Yep.
Oh, Dumbo.
Well, that's Drake. And, or is that you, Bill?
That's me, yeah.
That's you. And Behrman there. And Keith Holder. Yes, remember him? Young.
Jerry, yeah.
And Lake. And there's Ken Hode. And
Yes, Bob.
who's that?
Bob.
Bob. Oh yes, Pomfrey. Pomfrey, that's right. Gosh, well remembered. Is that Murgatroyd again?
Yeah.
Stuff. Very good. So that was 1961. Now we're going back to rugby here. This was just to show that there was a hierarchy of the junior Colts and then the Colts and then the second 11 and into the first 11. And there's another one. And this is a rather nice picture provided by Alan Green's collection. He's got the wonderful archive that he's set up. And there are various hats, and of course you've got colours and so on in sport, but also prefects had different numbers of rings on their hats, and if you were the head boy you had a tassel or something. I did become the head boy because Bill King, who is here today, who was the head boy, captain of the school, decided to leave conveniently early, and so I was promoted. It didn't last long, but I don't remember having the tassel. I think I like most people, I used to take the cap off as soon as I left the school gate. Games were played in Chartres, our twin city. That was a soccer match, and I think there's another. Those are matches with Chartres, 1961. And there is John Snow, who was one of the best England and Sussex fast bowlers of his era. There were other individuals. John Bartlett was a blue at Oxford in cricket and played for Sussex and the Gentlemen. And there's John. I did actually, in a house match, face John Snow as a bowler. I was the captain of the Bell House, and they thought that I ought to be in the cricket team. I don't know why, but they thought that was my duty, so they put me in at number 13. And no, number 11. 13 would have been happier for me, but no, number 11, last in. And when I arrived at the crease, we had 1 run less than them. 1 run less. And anyway, I closed my eyes, and John Snow took this enormous straight run, came up, and I slashed out, and I managed to hit the ball, and we ran and got 1 run, and so we were even, we were drawn, and there was considerable applause from the other side, and then the next ball was to me again, because that was the last ball of the over, so a particularly insignificant bowler from the other end, and I was down the other end by then, bowled and got me out straight away. And I thought I'd be the hero, but I went back and they were all furious because the match had to be replayed. And I wasn't asked to be in the team second time. We mustn't forget Jeff Wills, who we saw earlier on. He captained both soccer and cricket and played representative games for the English Schools Cricket Association. And many of the soccer players had careers post-school at university or for local teams. George Steadman is an example, playing at Arundel. And rugby saw stars like Alan Paulson and also the remarkable Baz Cooper, who sadly died a couple of years ago, who was not only rather brilliant at sport, but he was rather brilliant at absolutely everything. And he went to Leeds University and became a professor in physics and everything, and he led all the Alan Turing celebratory events 3 or 4 years ago. And I particularly remember Baz for coming into the classroom. He was in my class, and he used to sit most mornings reading The Sporting Life. And somehow he used to get bets put on, and he had this mathematical brain that actually managed to work out all the odds, and he used to win as well. And when he was interviewed for a college at Oxford, there was this lovely story that he finished his interview and got up and walked straight into a cupboard. Which I think probably got him in. Now, many people may remember cross-country runs. Yes, wet and muddy, depressing, down the Chichester Canal towpath and back over the nunnery fields, stopping for a cigarette halfway in my case once. And there were, of course, the athletics, taken really quite seriously. Outstanding individuals competed at High and Sussex and national championships. Ray Eatwell stands out as an example, and a little earlier Peter Tyrrell became the first High boy to represent Sussex in the junior high jump. There was house competitions, of course, as well, involving ball games, and the annual sports day saw involvement and competition for all, it says here, most, I would say. There's a nice picture here of people I remember. That's Pete Spall on the left. Do you remember Pete Spall? This was obviously on the sports day, I think. And I've lost my little red doofer. There it is. And Mick Halson, I think. Is that Mick Halson there?
Yes.
And where's Des Hodnett? He's there, I think. Yeah.
It's 59.
59? Thank you very much. The athletics, there's a picture of a sort of general athletics group. And during this period, pre and post-war and into the 60s, The playing fields were extensive and well maintained. Subsequent decisions, of course, lost considerable acreage to development. With a bit of compensation, there were all-weather facilities put in and other sports, hockey and tennis, for example. I hate this picture coming up. Jim dominated every schoolboy's week, it says here, to the horror of many. Feeble attempts to master the parallel bars, vaulting horse or ropes, climbing ropes. Well, I couldn't do anything of those. And Baldy Ashton was responsible for some of the sadistic techniques that went on. Tinker Tailor, particularly in my case. What I shall never ever forget, the day we did blind boxing. I've told this story before, and Tinker Tailor gave us boxing gloves and put 4 people together onto mats and said, right, off you go. And we were blindfolded as well. And I was knocked out straight away, which was probably quite good really, but he leant over me, and as I woke up he said, are you all right, Wood, are you all right? And I, thinking I was being very brave, said, oh yes, I think so. So we said, go and have another go then. And so I got knocked out again. He was not my favourite master. The CCF remained active and does so to this day, as we shall see later this afternoon. And now here is the RAF section, Easter Camp at Dishforth in Yorkshire in 1959, and we can see John Hyland there and Tom Beastle, who obviously accompanied the young ones. And there was an overseas visit round about this time. We've got a slide that's come in. That's back in Paris. Don't know whether anybody recognises themselves there, but I can see Eric Smedley, Frank Hale. Don't know who that is hiding behind there. The school always had an excellent reputation for extramural and extracurricular activity. And Bill says we're not referring to meeting the girls from Chichester High School for Girls as extracurricular activity. I think they were. The bus station was quite a good place. From the inception of the school, clubs were created. The first was the chess club, as we saw earlier. There were other clubs, trips, music and drama, giving opportunities for boys to pursue hobbies, interests and skills. We'll mention a couple. There was the Railway Club, and there was a visit here to Stuart's Lane Engine Shed in South London. Looks interesting. And there was music, school choir, choral society, debating society. There was a science society, meteorological society, motor, music appreciation, which some of us thought took in rock and roll and jazz, and all demanded considerable commitment from individual members of the staff. And the one I particularly remember is George Ayling, Adolf, who he was on a hiding to nothing really with music, I think, in many ways, but he persevered. And here there's a school concert, I think, and Adolf is sort of here conducting. You can't see him, you see him in a moment, but that was, I think this is the same concert. There he is. And I think that was Horsey Stables down there. Didn't he play the oboe or something? Yes, I think.
And bassoon.
And the violin.
Yes.
And the bassoon.
And the bassoon. And the piano. Horsey Stables was a remarkable man. But no, I remember singing in the choir a couple of times, and George Ayling was a lovely man. One of the best loved and the best remembered clubs was the Junior Field Club, led by Bogey Murch, and they had weekend trips and extended visits. There they are, with a rather splendid coach. There's Bogey on the extreme right there. And there's also the picture I think we saw earlier. There we are. Now, is this Hazelmere Museum? maybe.
But possible, yeah.
Who knows? And ballroom dancing was introduced, which brought us together with some real girls from Chichester High School Girls' School. And I suppose, I don't know, we had a go at mastering the waltz and the foxtrot with mixed results. And the mixing didn't really occur because at the end of each dance the boys would always sort of separate on one side and the girls the other. Described. Here is, and it's in the other room where it's best seen, this is a timeline that Alan Green kindly prepared showing the history of the school going through. And I'm going to leave it there because that's roughly where we've got to. Thank you for all listening and see you for a cup of coffee. Thank you very much.